Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the World Trade Center Network? What is one trade center, in particular, World Trade Center Kentucky, doing to promote international trade, enhance economic development, and create employment? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're taking a look at a really unique organization, the World Trade Center Network, and one in particular that could be a microcosm for the other 300 around the world. My guest today is an expert on the World Trade Centers. My guest today is Mr. Ed Webb. Ed Webb, who is the president and CEO of the World Trade Center Kentucky, manages the operations and strategic direction for this Global Trade Association. In 2010, Mr. Webb was appointed Honorary Consul of France for Kentucky. Much of Mr. Webb's international experience includes his work in the UK, France, and Argentina. He obtained his MBA while training and studying in Moscow and in Perm, Russia, and received it from Bellarmine University in Louisville, Kentucky. Ed Webb, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Feel good to be here. Thank you.
Appreciate you being with me. We're going to talk about a really interesting organization that we don't hear enough about. Let's just start about what are the World Trade Centers? What's this World Trade Center concept? When was it formed? Why was it formed? How many of them are there around the world?
Great story for you real quickly here. Rockefeller had the idea of a trade center back in the actual 50s, and a guy by the name of Guy Talazzi formed the first trade center back in 1973 in New York City. And the idea was to help businesses, as Guy saw it, figure out how to import and export product for the various businesses. He saw the need there and felt there's a need for an organization to bring it all together and help those businesses at that point in time in New York to have a single source for trade opportunities and to figure out where do I go for trade information, trade support.
Exactly, that's how it started.
That's how it began, and it branched out since then to, as you mentioned earlier, we have over 300 offices in over 92 different countries. And it's become more of a franchise operation where, in fact, you begin in New York City at the association level and you apply for a right to have the offices, in this case in Kentucky, which is in Lexington as our original office, and our primary office, an office in Louisville too. But that was back in 1989 for Kentucky, and we're celebrating 25 years for the Trade Center in Kentucky.
That's
Thank
great.
You very much.
Yes. Well, we're going to talk about Kentucky, World Trade Center Kentucky. We get the title right, and this could be a microcosm, as I mentioned earlier. We could be doing this program in Buenos Aires, we could be doing it in Moscow, we could be doing it in Beijing, we could be doing it in Chicago or New York or Trenton, New Jersey.
Yes.
They all have them,
right.
Which is very important. But you've got a video. We've got about a 51-second video. Let's go to that, take a look at it, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Sounds good. I'm Ed Webb, President and CEO of the World Trade Center Kentucky. The Trade Center began 25 years ago to help Kentucky businesses import and export and become aware of the power of trade for their business itself. We help companies from small to mid-sized companies in terms of figuring out if they can move to a new market, be new to export, but more importantly, to know that exporting can help their businesses grow.
Ed, I think that gave us a really good overview, a very quick overview of the World Trade Center Kentucky. Tell me a little bit more about it. When was it formed, and what are some of are you a membership organization? You have businesses or individuals that are members?
Bill, you're right on target. We call it more of a client relationship organization because membership itself implies things you have to get down the road. And clients want information now, so we call it more of a client organization where they do pay a retainer fee each year to be part of the Trade Center. Martha Lane Collins, back when she brought Toyota to Kentucky, she along with Scotty Baszler,
who was the governor of Kentucky back in the mid-'80s.
There you go,
right.
Exactly. And through her travels, discovered the trade center concept and said, we need to do this for Kentucky. And she and Scotty brought one to Lexington back again in '89. It opened there, it grew, and 5 years later, we opened the second office in Louisville. So in effect, Kentucky is one of the few states that has 2 offices of the World Trade Center Association. But that's how it began, and it began basically, as you mentioned earlier, as a membership organization getting businesses out there who needed help to understand or to be able to be involved or engaged in trade.
Mm-hmm. Now, do we have statistics on how international trade impacts Kentucky? How many workers in Kentucky are part of the international, who would be classified or identified working on international trade activities and things like that?
Yes, in fact, I work with a guy named Brad Thomas at the Kentucky Cabinet, who's my numbers geek for trade activities in the state of Kentucky. Right now, trade accounts for roughly 125,000 jobs for Kentucky workers. Mm-hmm. And as of last year, 2013, Kentucky exported a record number, shattered previous records at $25.2 billion in exports. That's big for us, and it's grown steadily over the last 4 years. In fact, we're trending right now into 14 to have a new record in trade. So we're looking at potentially 5 record-breaking years of trade of exports for the state of Kentucky itself, which is really impressive.
Great. Did I see on your website that Kentucky was number 2 in exports as far as increase, I guess?
That's exactly right, and we are, and we're trending again that same direction, Bill. We are number 2. Number of factors that we can get into later, what's happening there, but we are second behind New Hampshire. I saw that.
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, what happened here? That's a blip. There's a legitimate story there behind that, but we are number 2 in growth.
Exactly. And again, the important thing, while we're talking about Kentucky as sort of a prototype, people in all parts of the world who are watching the show right now can say, I probably have a World Trade Center in my hometown, or perhaps if you're living in a large urban area, because as you mentioned, they're in 92 countries and over
growing.
300 cities and growing. So it's very important. Let's talk a little bit about Kentucky. Kentucky is I guess a medium-sized state, medium to small, you might say. It has about 70,000 square kilometers, about 42,000 square miles, has about 4.2 million people living in the state. Used to be an agrarian state, a rural state, but that's certainly changed quite dramatically. What are some of the top trade items that you're exporting? You would think years ago it might be corn or horses or something like that, but that's changed, has it not?
It's changed a lot. So great, and by the way, you've done your homework on our numbers here for the state of Kentucky, and the state has changed dramatically. Top export for Kentucky is actually aerospace. And aerospace. People are shocked by that. And you look at the fact we're selling a number of jet engines from GE. We sell a special brake made for jets in Kentucky, a braking device to slow the jets down. And we also sell a fuel mixture that's used in the space shuttle. But those are the top 3 things, or actually many of 3 things we actually export that are part of our aerospace industry. Second being automotive. No shock there with Toyota, Ford, and the Corvette plant in Bowling Green.
Exactly.
And those are top place for us. Third being computers, machine parts and the like, followed by resins, and by 5th by chemicals. So those are our top 5. And what's shocking, you're right on target. At one point, it was tobacco. And at one point, people would say, why wouldn't it be bourbon? Spirits is big. There's big growth for us in the state with spirits. In fact, it's ranked 10th as far as exports right now. But
is that right?
We're evolving.
Yes.
It isn't changing. And they've actually moved up. I think the whole bourbon concept's been very good for the state, both domestically and internationally. So
exactly. And it certainly seems to be on the uptick right now. There seems to be more of an appreciation for bourbon. It's interesting, too, as I recall, one statistic years ago I heard that Kentucky produced like 97% of all the bourbon produced in the world came from the state of Kentucky, which was an interesting statistic.
As Governor Beshear says, the other 3% is fraud and not real stuff. And I will tell you the bourbon, I'm a bourbon drinker, and it's funny, the number jumps between 10th and 8th, and it's usually 8th probably around Derby time and or when I'm drinking it myself. But right now we're 10th.
Exactly, right. Well, it's very interesting. And who are some of your main partners? I mean, as far as, not partners, but your main consumers, where are you shipping? Do you ship primarily to Canada, to Japan, Mexico, other parts of the world?
Well, that's a good question, and it's pretty common among this region. The top trading partners for Kentucky right now are Canada and Mexico. Those are two big. And that's part of NAFTA. The trade agreement was
North American Free Trade Agreement.
Exactly, there you go. And that's a major play for us. In fact, we just did a trade mission to Canada a year ago with the governor, and that continues to grow for us as far as opportunities. That's followed by the United Kingdom. In fact, the governor just got back on a trade mission in May with the UK, visiting there to try to create more trade opportunities both back and forth between those two countries, our two countries. That's followed by China and Brazil. And you're seeing a lot of positioning there between the fourth and fifth slots, followed by Germany, followed by France.
Okay, so you have quite a diversity of partners, a real potpourri of partners out there. We're going to talk about the trade mission in just a moment and your 25th anniversary, but I want to make sure to get this in. You have a very unique program called the Kentucky Export Initiative. Very briefly, what is that? What does it do?
That's a program that Governor Beshear created back in 2010 in partnership with with Washington as part of the National Export Initiative, with a goal to double exports over the next 5 years. What the governor mandated from all the trade associations in the state is to work together to have a single voice for businesses to go to in terms of, this is your resource to figure out what I need to export this product. So I work closely with the state, with the Kentucky Cabinet. I work closely with the Small Business Association. I work closely with the U.S. Commercial Services, and we're all on the same team. Different leadership, but on the same team, same voice to make sure if you come to me and say, I need help, I give you the same message you get from the DOC.
Great.
It's been very beneficial for the state of Kentucky. It's been huge for us.
I'm sure it certainly has. And if our viewers would like more information, they can go to WTCKY.org and get a lot more information on what we're talking about today.
That's correct.
And maybe what we won't have a chance to get to. You have 3 basic services, and if we could go through those. If I'm a small business person, or I come to you and say, I'd like to export, but I really don't know how to do it. Do you provide consultation, trade consulting to me or to medium-sized or even large businesses, I guess?
Bill, we do it all. And the key thing I think we go back to is the Kentucky Export Initiative, because what it does for us, when you come to me as a business person, we go through an assessment process to figure out where you are in the trade curve. And we'll place you within the Trade Center, with the SBA, or within the U.S. Commercial Services. Our primary product for the World Trade Center is threefold, as you mentioned. First, being an education platform. We provide educational services to those businesses on how to export, understanding various compliance issues, various trade issues, how to get started. We do a great program each year now with the University of Kentucky, the Gatton College, which is an MBA program, only 2 of its kind in the U.S., where we actually have an 8-day session for MBA students to figure out trade, to get those students ready for international training. Along with the certification series we do twice a year to certify businesses and their employees in international trade. So that platform is huge for us. It's our biggest thrust, is to educate and create awareness for trade itself in Kentucky. The second being the Trade Center Consulting Services. We have a group of consultants who work on market branding, market analysis, how to find sources or new resources in a given market, and they work with you after the assessment to figure out where you are, again, on that trade export curve. So the consulting services is like the 6th man on the basketball team. We're there for you to make sure we're holding your hand, creating that trade advocate within your company to keep that trade activity, to get started and to keep it going. And the third thing we do, the third leg, is the trade missions that we do every year with the Kentucky Cabinet and with the governor. I mentioned going to Canada last year. We went to the UK this past year. And it's important because what we do with the state, they know the driving opportunities as far as what countries we really want to develop a relationship with, as far as foreign direct investment, to increase the export activities. So with the governor's office, we'll select a country and make that decision, get the day set aside meetings, receptions with the ambassadors there, and bring as many Kentucky businesses that we can that want to make those connections.
Exactly. And that is so critical to have the governor involved. You mentioned earlier about Governor Martha Lane Collins when she was the governor back in the mid-'80s. And of course, she was instrumental in bringing Toyota Motor Corporation to Kentucky, and they set up a large plant in Georgetown, Kentucky, which really, a lot of people believe, moved Kentucky into the international arena as an international player, where perhaps it had not been as much prior to that. But it's critical to have the governor, the #1 CEO, really, for any state or a province around the world. Doesn't matter if you live in Argentina or Quito, Ecuador, or wherever. You want to get the #1 person involved in these trade missions, do you not?
We do, and I got to tell you this, Governor Beshear, I was with him in Canada and with him briefly before we left for the UK mission. He gets it. He gets it. This administration, Larry Hayes, the Secretary of the State, those folks understand the power of trade. And it does go back to Martha Lane. And you have to give Martha Lane a lot of credit. To this day, she's out there beating the drum continually, Bill, through the Kentucky Export Initiative, saying, think outside the U.S., think internationally. And here's how we can make it happen for you. So it goes back to one vision over 28 years ago.
Exactly.
And one big company.
It certainly was. And is there, I guess, any company could participate, even if you're a small company, if you have 4 or 5 employees, the key is to have the interest in exporting and also have a product that would be of interest to people in other parts of the world they want to buy, but you're never really too small to be an exporter, are you?
That's a great point. On the video you saw earlier, there was a company called Kinetic, the technology company. And if you listen to the story they tell, they began as a small company and they're up to 125 plus employees now because of international trade. And they're a software provider, basically. So you can export a product and our services. We have legal firms and we have accounting firms that have a certain expertise that's required in a given country. And we will in turn export that talent, that service. So back to your point, you can be a 2-person legal firm, but if you have an expertise that's unique to that country, they want it, and they'll ship you over there in a heartbeat to spend time with their staff or their offices to train. So
exactly.
Size is it's all about demand, basically. And we've had companies that say, we want to do this is great for us, but the first thing we ask, Bill, any company, is how is your domestic sales doing? Are you doing well there? And if they're not, we'll look at that very carefully through the assessment. So you maybe need to strengthen up your sales in the U.S. markets first before you go international.
Exactly, right. You have to have, as they say, you have to be aligned. I mean, you have to have everything working for you where you're operating, because if you're not doing well here, you may not do as well overseas. What are the risks today? A lot of people ask about that. They say, well, if I export, how do I know I will get paid? You obviously bring that in when you consult with people, you educate the folks and you work with them. But there's really, today, it's almost foolproof, is it not? I mean, as far as you will get paid and you don't have to worry about shipping your goods and not getting reimbursed?
The number one thing is for any company, it's fear of the unknown. And once a company realizes that other companies at the same scale or same product are doing or engaged in trade exporting, they're more apt to say, well, if they can do this, I can do that. But fear is a big factor. Will I get paid? Is there a need for my product outside of the U.S.? And back to your point, there's so many big players now in trade, but between the banks that trade or play internationally, EXIM Bank, which is a huge resource for small businesses, there are tools out there that are guarantees basically you pay for, that you get you pretty much warrant your sales to make sure you're going to get paid by a given buyer or purchaser in this case. So you eliminate most of that risk. Other risks, there are always risks. A shipment could get lost, unheard of, but it does happen, it can happen. You might order something from if you're importing, bringing a product in, you might not get what you want sometimes. It might be the product you actually asked for, and that depends on the relationship you have with your source. I made a mistake, send it back, and send me the proper product. So I can't tell you it's 100% risk-free, but you know what? It's pretty close to it. We got some major players out there between the banks, between the shippers, between the trade centers, the SBAs and the DOCs that work with you to make sure it's painless. So.
Exactly. You mentioned the Export-Import Bank,
Yes,
and that's a major institution in the United States, but many countries have similar organizations, Export-Import Banks. They work with their businesses to help them export. We see that the Airbus, obviously the Europeans are working to help sell Airbuses. The Export-Import Bank works with Boeing Aviation to help sell Boeing 747s and other Boeing aircraft. There's a debate going on in Congress, has been raging for quite a while. How important is it to have an Export-Import Bank? And tell people a little bit about it. What does an Export-Import Bank do, and why is it important to have it?
It's key for the economy. EXIM, the acronym, goes back to the 1930s under Roosevelt. And people are shocked to hear that fact, 1930s. Yes, it's been around that long. Why is it important? Because what happens, Bill, when I'm a banker by training, and banks are hesitant on some trade activity to be involved with that because of the risk engaged or the risks that are there. EXIM fills that gap. And there are certain things that Ex-Im Bank can do to guarantee that payment will be made, that the money is provided to both parties, that a big bank can't always do. It's not that the bank doesn't want to do it, their guidelines won't allow it. So without Ex-Im, and this is a big issue right now in the Capitol, we've got to get this thing passed. And we're looking at right now, I think that Harry Reid's pushing for a resolution by September to make the decision. But for small businesses and mid-sized businesses, the Ex-Im Bank is a driving force behind their funding and their credit. So that's on our A list to get accomplished.
And of course, that is another agency that will help reduce the risk of you not getting paid, of you not getting your money. So it's a win-win situation. And as I understand it too, the Export-Import Bank actually operates at a profit, or a little bit of a profit.
$1 billion
and it
a year.
doesn't cost the taxpayer anything in the United States. Now that may be different in other countries, I don't know. Let's talk about your 25th anniversary. Congratulations. You've been in business 25 years. 2014 was the landmark year. What you celebrated on World Trade Day, which you do every year. What happened at World Trade Day? Who were some of your speakers? What were some of the issues discussed? Were there any awards given out, things like that?
Always awards given out. We give away the Martha Lane Collins International Trade Award to businesses who show us their growing trade, they understand international trade, and we give roughly 3 of those away to companies in the state that, again, show us export growth. We bring in speakers of all sorts. In this case, the speaking would be training the early part of the morning to make sure any new issues in compliance or involving tariffs or trade agreements are brought to the table so businesses can hear what's happening in the coming year as far as international trade and how it impacts Kentucky itself. Keynote speaker, Dr. Josh Meltzer from Brookings, brilliant individual, understands trade across the globe, not just in a given market, presenting what's happening globally with trade, what kind of impact we can see from the various changes in the economies. But it's a big educational networking session that we do yearly, and this year in Lexington. So it's exciting times for us. Again, having the 25th anniversary makes it even more special for us.
Exactly, it certainly does. Now, as you look over the horizon, you're a visionary, looking beyond today. Excuse me. What do you see as some of the major challenges confronting the World Trade Center, Kentucky, as well as the private sector and businesses in the future?
We certainly have the 5 issues that are right now in D.C. And you mentioned Ex-Im Bank, and that's a big concern for us because, again, it really impacts the mid to small companies as far as any kind of credit needs they might have. Some other issues for Kentucky itself is more of an opportunity. We're on a growth pattern right now. We look at our growth over the last 4 years. We did in 2010, roughly 19 billion, 11, 20 billion, 22, and 12, and then 13, 25 billion in growth. So we're on the right path. We're doing the right things here. Our hope is to keep the administration in Frankfurt alert to trade opportunities. And Governor Beshear has been wonderful for us because he does everything he can for us to make sure that businesses in the state understand the power of trade, and he gives us access to the Larry Hayes of the world and to the Brad Thomas of the world and that whole development staff. For me, that's not much a concern, but I hope it continues with future administrations because this has been such a good time for the state and we want it to continue down that path of growth. So that would be probably the greatest thing as for us whenever you have a governor who is in his last term has been so pro business and so pro exporting and trade, that we continue with that trend.
Exactly right. And as you were talking, I was thinking of the role of the private sector. The private sector has a tremendous role to play, and I was thinking of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. There were 8. I don't know if we didn't have a chance to get into them today, but the first one was to reduce abject poverty by 50%. That's actually been achieved primarily because of economic growth in China, India, but all private sector entities can play a role in that. Goal number 8 is to promote number 7, sustainable development. Number 8, promote international cooperation and partnerships. And you're certainly doing that in a variety of ways in spades by really focusing on what the private sector can do and how it can reach out to people in other parts of the world. But you play a very critical role. And again, we've talked about Kentucky as a prototype, but there are over 300 of these associations around the world. And I would encourage our readers to take a look at their community and to learn more about the World Trade Associations. But Ed Webb, CEO and President of World Trade Center, Kentucky, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill. My pleasure.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.